Welcome to the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin's What is Spirituality podcast. Your host, Steve Spilde, is the Associate Director at the Center. His guests talk about their evolving understanding of God, prayer, healing, and wholeness. Stay tuned at the end of this podcast to hear a sample of what the singing bowls sound like. And now, Steve Spilde.
Welcome. Today, my guest is Tom Roberts. Tom is well known in the La Crosse community, a longtime therapist. He's also a presenter of retreats and workshops. He's done many workshops here at the Franciscan Spirituality Center and done retreats at various places across the country. He's especially well known here at the Franciscan Spirituality Center as the presenter of the Tibetan Singing Bowls. And so it's my pleasure today to welcome Tom.
Thank you, Steve. Couldn't resist.
Tom, tell me how you first encountered the singing bowls.
Oh boy. Well, this will really date me. I'd always had a really small little machine-made brass bowl that I used in my meditation, to start and to end. I can't even tell you how long ago that was. But the first time I was introduced to singing bowls and what they were and how they worked and what they were used for was when I was either a junior or a senior undergrad at Madison. A friend of mine had gone over to Nepal, and I'm not quite sure why it was, but when he came back, he brought back these bowls that were about this size, about 6 inches across, kind of a deep kind of bowl. And we'd cross paths, and he says, "Tom, you got to come over to my place and hear these things. I've never heard anything like this." And so I did. And he was right. I mean, they were very, very powerful. And the tones and resonances that, even myself being a percussionist, I hadn't been subjected to, so to speak. I think he had about 3 or 4 of them, and he started playing them first by striking and then by singing around the rim, and I was captivated. And obviously this was back in the 70s. There was no Google, there was no internet, none of that stuff. And I said, well, short of going to Nepal, where do you find these? And he says, I have no clue. He says that the one thing that he did learn when he was over there was the Tibetan people, and I suspect the Dalai Lama was involved in this decision, were discussing about releasing some of the artifacts, the social, the art, the medical, the spiritual artifacts of the Tibetan culture that had been driven out of China. And obviously the bowls were in those discussions, and there were tens of thousands of them stored away in northern India and Nepal and what have you. Shortly afterwards, I began to start hearing about people going over there and being allowed to bring bowls back to the West, to introduce them to the West. And so I began searching around and found a couple of places where the people who were selling the bowls actually went there, were allowed to go into the large storage areas and select a limited number of bowls to bring back and use for themselves, as well as, to make them available to people in the West. So that was my first introduction to that. And as they became more plentiful and what have you, I began collecting bowls, matching them up and what have you. And then, as I have been doing for several decades, sharing them with people like I have at the Spirituality Center.
When would you say you got your first bowl? Would that have been like in the 80s?
Ooh, my first bowl. Boy, you're really trying the old memory here, Steve. I would say, late 70s, early 80s. I was in Minneapolis. There was a store there that specialized in Eastern artifacts, Chinese, Japanese, Tibetan, Southeast Asian. And there were a couple of bowls there. And I picked one up and I started to ring it, and then I started to sing it. It sounded good to me. I didn't really know the fine points of what made a good bowl at that point. I don't think many people did, except for the people in India, Nepal, and Tibet. So I purchased it. It was a bowl very similar to this, same size, shape, and what have you. Ridiculously inexpensive compared to what they're going for now. But that was my first bowl. And I would say late 70s, early 80s.
Do you still have your first bowl?
Yes. I don't play it much simply because of how much I've learned about bowls, what to look for in terms of resonance and how they're made and what have you. That bowl doesn't play very well with the other ones. The resonance isn't very good and the tone isn't very good compared to the other ones. But yes, I still do have it.
You mentioned that you were a percussionist. That's the instrument you played growing up?
Yep, started playing the drums at 10. My brother had a little snare drum and a cymbal, and I stole it from his room and started playing it. Yeah, started at 10.
Compare the experience you had when you used to play the drums, and maybe particularly like the cymbals, and how it feels different for you to play the singing bowls.
Well, the one thing is the volume. The music was very loud back then. It's interesting because the materials with which cymbals are made, good cymbals and singing bowls are made, are identical. They're made from bell metal. Obviously, cymbals are shaped differently. They're created much more differently than a bowl. So they have a different kind of resonance and what have you. The cymbals, when I was playing the drums with other musicians, was kind of like the frosting on the cake. Okay, there was the basic beat that was going on, but then bringing the cymbals in, whether they be a large cymbal or a smaller one or a hi-hat, really added a sense of vitality and dynamic resonance to not only the music, but also to the percussion. The percussion was very methodical, but the cymbals really added something. And so, the bowls being made of the same kind of material, there isn't the beat that's involved with this. I mean, so the playing can be much more spontaneous. For the most part, when I play the bowls, I'm playing them with no other musicians. So whether it's with a crowd, say at the Spirituality Center, or by myself, it is just the focus of the resonance and the depth and the length of the tone that really becomes very primary. There's no beat or rhythm. I mean, there can be. For the most part, it's just bringing the resonance and the tone of the bowl into a person's awareness and physical experience.
For someone who hasn't been to one of the concerts here, how would you refer when you play the bowls? Is it a concert or?
So I refer to them as soundings.
So someone who hasn't been to a sounding,
Sure.
How would you describe that experience? A lot of people have heard music, they've heard a band, they've heard an individual performer. Very different experience. How would you describe the experience to someone who hasn't had it?
Boy, oh boy. I don't think words can really describe it. I mean, it's kind of like you could describe the Grand Canyon to somebody. Basically, you end up saying, you just got to go there. I can describe the colors and the sunsets or the sunrises. You just have to go there and be in the presence of it. I would say if you've never been to one, don't expect anything. Just come being willing to receive the sound, being willing to be in the presence of the different resonances and how they play off of each other and how they affect you. I can talk about the different shapes and sizes and what that all means, but you just have to go there. You just have to allow yourself to feel that experience and what that does to clearing tensions and stresses, as well as really calming down the nervous system in some pretty significant kind of ways. And the thing that's really kind of cool is Western science has finally caught up with what's been known for thousands of years about the effects that these bowls have on our nervous system, on our cellular system, our endocrine system, because, now we can measure them and, have things on our head and taped all over our body to kind of measure things. And these bowls would not have lasted as long as they have if it was just woo-woo kind of stuff. They are very powerful, and they have been incorporated finally into Western medicine in helping people with a variety of conditions. Even though these bowls come from a long time ago, they really do play a very important part in a person's spiritual and physical and emotional well-being.
Yeah, you were talking about basically how it connects with the body. That's the piece that I would probably describe to someone who hasn't been, that it's coming out of it, I feel more like I've gotten a massage than I've listened to something. I mean, it is that sort of experience. When I've had a massage, it's almost like I go somewhere else and I kind of have to find myself back in the room again. The bowls is kind of like that. It's almost like I go somewhere else, and at the same time, my body feels relaxed in a way that I only ever experience with massage.
It is kind of like a sound massage. When people describe their experiences, they describe it much the same way you did, Steve. Other people report some visual kinds of things, colors, images, what have you. Other people feel some significant kind of releases going on in their body, muscular or nervous system system where they have stored maybe tensions and stresses that people have reported that they came in with maybe an injured shoulder or what have you. And when it was over, they said, for the first time in however amount of time, I forgot about the pain. And now that I've kind of come back, I notice that I'm not noticing the pain as much. And when I ask on a scale of 1 to 10, what is it usually and what is it now? They may say like a 7 or an 8, and now it's a 3 or a 4. Because our bodies are made up predominantly of water, and we know how water responds to vibration. The resonances help kind of release and discharge areas of injury or wound or tightness. So I just tell people, just be open. It's going to be different. People occasionally will say it wasn't a pleasant experience, that it was too intense. It was stirred up emotions that they weren't prepared for or what have you. So, I let people know that, although these are wonderful and soothing, and there's all sorts of wonderful stuff written about the bowls, that occasionally it might reach an area that has remained silent for a long time, creating kind of physical experiences or emotional experiences that may not always be pleasant. So, I always let people know that, approach anything that you're going to use for your well-being with a measure of caution. Make sure that it's right for you.
Right here, you saying is it's powerful medicine.
Yeah.
Like any sort of powerful medicine. I mean, it can do more than you expect.
Yep. Bowls in the Tibetan culture have been used extensively in their medical practices. And if you read about the Tibetan approach to medicine, it's very, very fascinating. And bowls were a very active part of that, as well as for spiritual and social and those kinds of things. So yes, very powerful medicine that the West is finally catching up to recognizing.
That's been my experience with the Tibetan bowls. It's very much of an experience of kind of being surrounded by something. Like I said, it feels like a massage, but being surrounded by something. But I've also heard like the crystal singing bowls, and that is a much more piercing. For me, it almost feels like a laser. And that's the one that I really like, the crystal bowls. But there's been experiences where it almost feels like a laser going into a particular part of my body. And I could imagine if I've had some wounding there or some trauma I'm storing there, it could be too much.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And again, we have to take a look at why are we doing this, first of all? Why am I coming to this? What am I expecting out of it? And recognize that it could be. And the distinction between the crystal and the Tibetan bowls is that you described it very well, Steve. The crystal bowls are a pure note. It is an absolute pure note. It is like a laser. And when it's used in healing and what have you, you will feel that very much more directly with the crystal bowl. They often will resonate at a variety of different notes. If you can hear, there's a high note, there's a medium note, and there's a lower note.
Ring it a little bit louder. The Zoom is kind of straining out the sound.
That's what the bowl does. When people have wanted to do this over the internet, there is such a range of tone. The platform like Zoom doesn't know which one does it pick up on. And so like when I get a tuner to find out what is the predominant tone of a bowl, it's bouncing all around until it zeroes in on one. But it has a wide range of high, medium, and low tones. Especially the medium-sized bowls will have much more of that. So it can have a very kind of experience because there's just different resonances going on at the same time, as opposed to the crystal bowls. When they strike that or when they ring one of those bowls, it can make the walls shake if they're obviously made properly, a very pure tone.
You've shared that there is a reaction between the bowls and the surrounding environment, correct? I mean, you put people in the room, you could play the bowls for 10 different groups of people and the bowls would sound different each of the 10 settings, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Say more about that, how that happens.
I'm not quite sure how it happens. I will give you my suspicions about why it happens. There's a variety of things that go into it. Obviously, the shape of the room has a lot to do with it. Like if it's just a regular square kind of room with an 8-foot ceiling, you're going to get one kind of a sense. For example, go to the chapel at Cincinnati Mound and play them in there. Totally different ball game. It's almost like the ceiling, which is extremely high, almost lifts the sounds out of the bowl. So the room is a very important kind of piece. The number of people in the room, How many people are absorbing these sounds? Kind of the energy, people coming in feeling stressed or excited or what have you. And also, my mood plays a role in it too. If I've had a really stressful day, I have to make sure I'm approaching these bowls with a greater sense of patience. I'm bringing my attention into it. They'll react very differently. The bowls themselves, and I use the metaphor of kind of like a family, they don't always get along. There will be times when it's just absolutely beautiful. The bowls are just singing back and forth, resonating off of each other. And there'll be times where there may be 2 or 3 bowls that are, just like a 12-year-old saying, I'm not going to play. I'm not going to play. And so it's like, fine. That's all right. I'll play with the ones that want to. Why that happens, I'm not sure. Could be temperature, could be humidity. I know when I come to the center in the winter, I have to come about an hour or so early so I can get the bowls warmed up. There's a variety of kinds of things, because you're absolutely right. There will be times when I'm amazed at how it's going, and other times it's what's going on here. There's like an argument going on or what have you, and I have to try to respond to that in a way that works.
This kind of segue into how the bowls are a spiritual experience. How do you understand spirituality, and how are the bowls a resource in that?
And you said we only have 35 minutes? Holy smoke. I will give you a very condensed explanation of how I view spirituality. Spirituality for me is moving from a linear explanation of who we are and our place in it all, a linear kind of cause and effect sort of thing, to much more of a dynamic, fluid understanding, but being able to understand that we are a part of it all rather than apart from it all. A more linear kind of spirituality, or whatever you want to call it, places me here and all of that out there. Including whatever we call the divine, God, the Tao, whatever, but and so it's almost kind of a conflictual relationship. But when it's more circular and dynamic and fluid, we can relax and realize the universe isn't picking on us. Our whatever, however we define the divine, isn't picking on us, and we can relax into joining the dance. Being part of and recognizing that our space here, even though it consists of about 70 trillion cells, is the result of it all. We are part of it rather than apart from it.
The vibrations serve as a reminder to that, or an invitation into that, or kind of open our awareness to like, whoa.
Yes. Well, it's moving from a sense of awareness, which is what we have when we look around the room and we can see a car going by or the sun coming in or the computer screen, to a sense of consciousness. Awareness just says, oh, that's there, and I will label it. I'll label that a desk and a lamp and chairs and what have you. Consciousness moves us from that awareness to being able to understand that sense of interconnectedness. It is all here because of it all. I know that sounds really kind of abstract and what have you. And we are a participant in what creation has brought about. And however you define creation, we've been invited to this. Our role is to understand how to best interact, and I call it being in the midst of being. The bowls allow us to stop and pause and remind ourselves. You use exactly the right word, to remind. Means to return back to your original source. So it's to remind ourselves that we are an expression of the divine, not something removed from it or what have you. And how to be able to respond to that with greater patience and openness and compassion as we journey through our days, because we have our challenges. And being able to be reminded allows us to say, what is going on right now is inviting me into what's going on. Isn't always pleasant. I mean, it isn't always pleasant. I mean, and I hear so many people say, oh, well, I've been doing this kind of meditation or this kind of prayer, this kind of journey. It's not making anything any better. It's not supposed to. You're not in charge of that. What is occurring, and it's occurring because of things way beyond any individual. And our role is, what can I contribute? Even though it might be difficult or what have you, We've heard of kind of that wonderful shift that people are understanding when they're struck with cancer. I am not the cancer. The cancer does not have me. I have my life. And in the meantime, my body has cancer. So what do I do in the meantime? Rather than, oh my goodness, I've got cancer and what is happening? That's the linear part, the cause and effect. Just being able to say, this is happening. It's not pleasant. I'm scared. And in the meantime, I'm going to enjoy my grandkids, or I'm going to take a moment and enjoy the sunset, or I'm going to remember that even though I may have cancer, I'm still alive, and how to make the most of that. And so the bowls, when they ring, it's an opportunity just to say, stop for a moment. And what I like to invite people to do is recognize that the sound comes from silence, the sound emerges, and then it returns to silence. To remind people that silence was God's first language. The bowls are just that reminder of saying, amidst all the noise, all the distractions, all the fears, remind yourself to go back to that original source, because that will make how you journey through your life be one that comes out of a deeper place of compassion.
My first introduction to bowls, it was just a reminder that there was more to who I am than just my mind, because it's so easy just to live there. And so that sense of feeling those vibrations in the center of my body, it's like, oh, wait, there is a body. And like, wow, that feels really good. Oh, yeah, there's a heart here, too. I mean, it's just a reminder that who I mean by myself is so much bigger and more dynamic than just my mind. And then I think that very easily dovetails into the fact that, you know what, reality is a lot bigger and more dynamic than just my mind.
Exactly. And our mind likes to think it runs the show, that what it thinks is the most important thing going on. And so we have this disconnect between our body and our mind. Being able to unify that and remind ourselves that how our body goes, our mind goes, and how our mind goes, our body goes, that it's an interplay. And to remind ourselves of that, I share this in the retreats. I said, as a human being, each of us is incredibly irrelevant and insignificant, but at the same time, an amazing miracle. Inside your body, my body, comprised of 70 trillion cells, Steve. That's more cells than there are that we know of in our Milky Way. Just to be able to say, how did this all happen? Is an amazing miracle, but in the bigger scheme of things, we may not be as important as we were once taught to think we were. And that's humbling. I don't think that that's, a bad thing. I think it's just kind of like, wow, and we were invited to this. It's not all going to go perfect. Keep your perspective. And it's a real relief to know that we're not as big a deal as we once thought we were. It takes a lot of pressure off of us.
In all your years of doing the sounding, is there a story that comes to mind as like a particularly powerful story where someone had an amazing experience?
There was an individual that had sustained an injury a long time ago, and it was catching up with her, and it was making it very difficult for her to walk. Doctors were trying all sorts of stuff. And basically, she had to remind herself that her leg was there because she didn't feel it. And the doctors are trying to get things going and surgeries and medicines and electrical stuff and what have you. And she came up to me afterwards and, she had tears in her eyes. And she said, I felt my leg. I don't know what happened, but one of those tones came in through the bottom of my foot and went right up to my leg, and I felt my leg for the first time in years. And she said, I don't know how long this will last, but thank you. And, I said, well, it's the bowl. I'm the messenger. It's the bowl. But I mean, it was pretty powerful. And she would come periodically, and it's very similar kind of things would happen, sometimes more dramatic than others. She said, there is that one, and we picked out what bowl it was. She says, that tone wakes my nerves up in my leg. And she said, I told my doctor about it. And he just kind of stood there and looked at me like, what? She said, really? And he goes, well, then keep doing it. And that would be one experience. Just don't forget that you are an expression of something so much larger. Celebrate it when you can. And I think silence is one of the ways to do that.
If you have any questions about any of the programs that they offer at the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin, we invite you to call us at 608-791-5295. That's 608-791-5295. You can also visit our website at www.fscenter.org. www.fscenter.org. Thank you for listening.
Now, when our minds wander, because they will, come back to your breath and allow these tones to affect your entire body, not just your mind, not just your ears. Just be open and receptive to the tones.